Life in the United Kingdom looks familiar to many Americans from movies, music, and history, but actually living there reveals something completely different. The culture is similar enough to feel comfortable, yet different enough to constantly catch Americans off guard. And it's not the obvious things like driving on the left or having older buildings. It's the small habits, the social rules, and the everyday behavior that make Americans feel like they've stepped into a different version of Western life. Americans arrive expecting tea in the Queen, red telephone boxes, and double-decker buses, and while those things exist, they're just the surface. The real culture shock comes from the mundane moments: ordering coffee, chatting with neighbors, riding the train, or simply walking down the street. These everyday experiences carry invisible rules that no guidebook fully explains. Americans often describe it as feeling like they're watching a play where everyone knows the script except them. The language is the same. The cities look somewhat familiar, and yet something feels fundamentally different about how people interact, move through spaces, and relate to one another. It's this strange combination of familiarity and foreignness that makes the UK such a disorienting place for Americans. In this video, we break down the hidden culture shocks Americans never expect when they move to or visit the UK, the ones that actually shape daily life far more than any tourist attraction ever could. One of the first differences Americans notice is the pace of life. The UK is not slow, but it is far less rushed. People don't talk loudly in public spaces. Customer service isn't built around forced enthusiasm, and daily interactions feel more controlled. Americans who are used to fast service, high-energy environments, and loud conversations suddenly find themselves adjusting to a country where calmness is the default. Even public transport has a different atmosphere: minimal noise, clear personal space, and an unspoken rule of avoiding unnecessary disruptions. On the tube in London or trains across the country, people sit in near silence, reading books or staring at their phones, creating an environment that feels almost meditative compared to American public transit. Restaurants don't rush you out the door after your meal. Servers won't check on you every 5 minutes asking if everything is okay. In fact, getting the bill can sometimes feel like a quest because the staff won't bring it until you explicitly ask. This isn't bad service, it's simply a different philosophy. The assumption is that you're there to enjoy your time, not to be processed through as quickly as possible. Americans initially interpret this as indifference or slowness, but over time many come to appreciate the lack of pressure. There's less performance in everyday interactions, fewer forced smiles, and more genuine moments of quiet coexistence. The energy is lower, but so is the stress. Communication style becomes the next major shock. British people use indirect language far more than Americans do. A phrase like, "That's interesting," can mean "I disagree," and "not bad" can actually mean, "That was great." Sarcasm is subtle, humor is dry, and compliments are delivered cautiously. Americans who are more direct often misinterpret politeness as distance or assume someone is upset when they're not. This communication gap is one of the biggest challenges for Americans adjusting to the UK. British conversation is layered with understatement, irony, and social coding that Americans simply aren't trained to decode. When a British person says, "I'll bear that in mind," they might mean absolutely not, but I'm being polite. When they say with respect, they often mean the opposite. Americans, used to more literal and enthusiastic communication, find themselves constantly second-guessing what people actually mean. Compliments are rare and understated. If a British person says your work is quite good, that's high praise. If they say it's not terrible, they might actually be impressed. The British also apologize constantly, even when nothing is their fault, which Americans find baffling at first. Saying sorry is less about admitting blame and more about maintaining social harmony. This indirectness extends to disagreements too. Rather than confronting issues head-on, British people often hint, deflect, or use humor to diffuse tension. For Americans who value directness and clarity, this can feel exhausting or even dishonest, though it's simply a different cultural approach to maintaining peace. Social behavior reveals even more differences. The UK has strict, unwritten rules about politeness, rules many Americans never learn until they accidentally break them. Apologizing constantly, keeping conversations low, respecting cues, not showing frustration publicly, giving people space in public areas, and not cutting in front of others are all deeply ingrained habits. Americans who grew up with louder, more expressive, more individualistic behavior often feel like they stand out without meaning to. Cue jumping, for instance, is treated almost like a moral crime. The British take their cues incredibly seriously, and cutting in line, even accidentally, can earn you genuine hostility. Americans also tend to be more physically expressive, using bigger gestures, standing closer during conversations, and making more direct eye contact. In the UK, this can feel invasive. Personal space is sacred, and people maintain more distance even in crowded places. Public displays of emotion are also less common. Complaining loudly, celebrating too enthusiastically, or expressing anger openly can make others uncomfortable. The British value restraint and composure, especially in public settings. Americans who are naturally more expressive often feel like they're being asked to shrink themselves. Another unspoken rule involves small talk. In the US, strangers might strike up conversations in elevators or grocery store lines. In the UK, unsolicited conversation with strangers is less common and can even be seen as intrusive. It's not that British people are unfriendly, they're simply more reserved with people they don't know. Daily life routines also change dramatically. Grocery stores are smaller and designed for frequent visits rather than one massive weekly shop. Homes are more compact, public transport is used far more frequently, and walking becomes a normal part of everyday life. The weather shapes routines much more than in many parts of the US. Even simple tasks like doing laundry or heating a home reveal cultural priorities Americans don't expect. Efficiency, practicality, and space saving are more important than convenience or speed. Most British homes don't have large dryers. Instead, people hang clothes to dry indoors or outdoors, which takes longer but uses less energy. Refrigerators and freezers are smaller, which means shopping happens more often but with fresher ingredients. Kitchens are generally more compact, with less counter space and fewer large appliances. Heating systems operate differently too. Many homes use radiators and programmable thermostats that heat rooms only at certain times, rather than keeping the entire house warm constantly. This is partly due to higher energy costs and smaller living spaces. Americans used to large suburban homes with central air conditioning and heating find British homes chilly and cramped at first. Walking and public transport dominate daily routines in ways that feel foreign to car-dependent Americans. Even in smaller towns, people walk to shops, take buses, or cycle far more than they would in the US. The weather, often gray, damp, and unpredictable, forces people to dress in layers and always carry an umbrella. Rain isn't an event. It's just part of life, and routines continue regardless. But the biggest difference Americans experience isn't the food, the houses, or the public behavior. It's the social mindset. The UK values community comfort more than personal expression. Being too loud, too excited, or too opinionated can feel out of place. People avoid confrontation, avoid drawing attention, and think collectively rather than individually. For many Americans, this is the hardest adjustment. Learning how to exist in a society where blending in is seen as a strength, not a weakness. American culture celebrates standing out, being bold, and expressing individuality. The UK, by contrast, emphasizes fitting in, maintaining harmony, and not disrupting the collective experience. This doesn't mean people lack personality or opinions. They simply express them more subtly and in appropriate contexts. Americans who are used to voicing their thoughts openly, challenging ideas in meetings, or debating passionately often find themselves toning it down in the UK. Being too assertive can be perceived as aggressive or arrogant. The British value humility and self-deprecation, often downplaying their achievements and avoiding boastfulness. This creates a social environment where people are careful not to make others uncomfortable, where restraint is valued over enthusiasm, and where the group's comfort often takes precedence over individual desires. For Americans, this can feel stifling at first. The instinct to speak up, take charge, or express excitement is met with polite silence or subtle discouragement. Over time, many Americans learn to navigate this balance, finding ways to express themselves while respecting the cultural norms around them. And this is the part most Americans never hear about. Once these differences settle in, life in the UK begins to feel surprisingly balanced. The quiet politeness, the calmer pace, the subtle humor, and the deep respect for personal space create an environment that many Americans end up preferring. It's different, sometimes confusing, but also more peaceful than many expect. The lack of constant noise and performance in daily life becomes refreshing. The slower meals, the thoughtful conversations, the absence of forced cheerfulness, all of it starts to feel less foreign and more natural. Many Americans find themselves adopting British habits without realizing it. Apologizing more, speaking more softly, waiting patiently in queues, and appreciating understatement. The cultural adjustment is real, but so is the reward. Life in the UK offers a different rhythm, one that prioritizes calm over chaos, subtlety over spectacle, and collective well-being over individual assertion. For Americans willing to adapt, it becomes not just livable but genuinely enjoyable. The reserved nature of British culture, once frustrating, becomes comforting. The indirect communication, once confusing, becomes a kind of social dance that feels satisfying once mastered. The smaller homes, the frequent walks, the reliance on public transport, all of it contributes to a lifestyle that feels more connected and less isolated than many American suburban experiences. If you want more content comparing life around the world, make sure you subscribe and tell us what country we should cover next.